You're listening to Becoming Wildly Resilient, brought to you by University of Kentucky Human Resources, Health and Wellness. Together, we will discover how we can thrive at work, home, and beyond. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Becoming Wildly Resilient. My name is Sebastian Calmes. I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a wellness specialist with UKHR Health and Wellness. Welcome to 2025. We got a great episode here for you today. We're going to be covering financial wellness, personal finance basics, and how it relates to mindfulness, happiness, and maybe we can debunk some financial myths. To talk with me about this topic today is Dr. Bruce Ross. Bruce, thanks so much for being on the show with me today.
Thanks for having me, Sebastian. I'm excited to be here.
Would you mind telling me a little bit about your role here at UK?
I'm an associate professor in the Family Sciences Department here at UK. I'm also the program director for the Family Financial Counseling undergraduate major and the program director for the Graduate Certificate in Financial Therapy.
Nice. And how did you land here at UK?
Well, that's a long story. I grew up in a very family finance-oriented family. My original trajectory through college was in finances and economics, but I shift about halfway through going towards the therapy route. And so then got a master's in marriage and family therapy, but as I was seeing clients and doing therapy, I realized we kept coming back to issues around money. And the stresses, the relational issues, the emotional issues, the communication problems around money. I switched gears a little bit and went for a doctorate in financial therapy through a marriage and family therapy program, but also took financial counseling and planning courses through that curriculum as well. I got a doctorate in marriage and family therapy, but with a specialization in financial therapy and with a focus with financial counseling and planning. So a long way to say, I really want to help families be better with money.
And finances is like one of those biggest, most common causes of...
Absolutely. It's still the number one reported reason for divorce and separation. It's still the biggest issue that comes up. It's one of the main conflict areas that comes up in relationships and for families and for emerging adults. I think what's interesting is even research has shown, even when it's not the top issue, it's still the most pervasive, most reoccurring, most constant or consistent issue.
It's really important to master personal finance.
Absolutely. Extremely passionate about people mastering their personal finance.
Financial well-being is one of the 8 dimensions of well-being recognized by the University of Kentucky Human Resources. Why do you think listeners should care about their financial health? Do you think financial health is something that impacts all dimensions of well-being? It sounds like you touched on that a little bit, where it was a pervasive factor in all families.
Yeah, absolutely. Almost everything we do is affected by money, from the jobs we have, the education we can get, the food we eat. Research after research, study after study shows finances have pretty direct associations with our mental health, our physical health, our emotional health, our relational health. We can't get away with it. So it's something we have to deal with eventually.
Yeah.
My thought is, let's deal with it before it becomes a problem.
As we're coming off the holidays and folks have been spending more on family and friends, like for gifts, how important is a financial reset at the beginning of the year?
I think it can be very important. I guess I'm a little hesitant about reset, because if you've already had a plan in place, if you were in alignment with what your budget was for that year, you don't necessarily have to have a complete reset. But it is always a good time to take stock and think about, what's this next year going to bring? What are the goals we have? One of my big sayings is, all financial goals are life goals. All life goals are really just financial goals. What are the life goals that are coming up over the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years, even the next 5 or 10 years? We can start planning for those, and what are the resources, what are the needs that are going to come into play for those that we do need.
You're really stressing the importance of having a plan, having goals, getting even a budget in place as a bare minimum, because maybe sometimes people don't even have that.
Yeah, budget often has a negative connotation. I've found just saying let's do a budget can become very stressful. I prefer to reframe that as a spending plan. A spending plan of how are we going to spend our money? How are we going to allocate the money and live within our means, but how are we going to spend that in accordance with our goals, our values, our wishes for the year?
I'll see people get a pay increase, then they increase their lifestyle, their spending habits. Then it's like you're never getting ahead. Is there a technical term?
Lifestyle creep.
It's called lifestyle creep. What are your feelings about that?
Oh, it's very common, and it happens to all of us. It happens to the best of us. I can admit it's happened to me occasionally. I think the important thing is to still take stock in what are those goals. Is your goal to increase and go on more date nights or go on more trips or buy more gifts? Is that what really your value is in life? Not your value with money, but what is your value in life? And if that is, then that can be your choice.
Yeah.
But if your goal is to then eventually buy a house or have kids or get married, those big cost items, get another car, maybe have a big family trip or something, we should take stock of what our values are and be in alignment with that. With lifestyle creep, there's this whole keeping up with the Joneses, which was a past generational phrase, and now we have keeping up with the Kardashians. I'm not sure what the new thing is now for the younger generations. There's all these societal pressures with social media we're bombarded with, and we have to really say no.
Yeah.
And what's our focus? What can we do in accordance with our values and spending plan?
I absolutely agree. Personally, I feel like values, that's where everything looks back to. How am I with the people around me? Well, what are my values? How am I with my finances and my money? Well, what are my values? I totally agree. A big component of finance is debt, and a common debt is credit card debt.
Yes.
Credit card bills may be high for some. How should folks approach paying these off if they can't pay it in full immediately? What are some good approaches?
Well, first, if you have credit card debt or significant credit card debt where you can't pay it off in full, I think the first thing we have to do is take a step back and think about or find out how we got to this place. Because that means, to an extent, we've lived beyond our means. We've spent more than we have coming in. We have to take stock of how we got to this point and make a change in our behaviors and our spending habits and realign our budget so that it fits. But if the practical kind of situation here is if that debt is spread across multiple credit cards, we need to make sure we do the minimum across all of those. There's going to be a minimum payment the credit card company is going to ask for. We have to make sure we have the minimum payments so our credit score is not dinged. We don't get a late fee. Now, we will be charged interest on whatever the remaining balance is, but our credit score won't get dinged. Now, the next step then would be to look at whatever credit card has the highest interest rate. From a purely financial perspective, and this is called the avalanche method, we look at what the highest interest rate is, and we put any remaining money towards that first.
So make minimum payments on, say, 3 credit cards, make 3 minimum payments.
Across all
but then
three.
Say one has like 24%.
And one has 18 and one has 16. We're going to put all that extra cash on the 24%.
Okay.
Now, there is also a snowball method, and that's going to cost you a little bit more in the long run, but it has a psychological advantage. So across those 3 cards, instead of looking at the highest interest rate, we look at whatever the lowest amount owed is. If we can pay off one of those credit cards very quickly, it can be a motivating factor to pay off the other ones or can to keep paying it off.
Because you can see the carrot, it's there.
You get a little carrot because you can check off a box, essentially, by checking off the credit card payment. Or finish paying that one credit card and then moving on to the next. It's going to cost you a little bit more because those interest rates might not be in the best alignment for paying it off, like it is in the avalanche method with the highest interest rate, but there can be a psychological benefit to it with checking that box.
I'm actually doing this right now with my student loans. I did a snowball where there was a couple with a low balance I just checked off.
And how did you feel after that?
Well, it snowballed quickly because within maybe 2 or 3 months, I paid off 2 loans.
Nice. Congratulations.
Now I'm switching to Avalanche because there's some 7% or 6%ers. So,
and those higher interest rates keep accruing more debt.
Exactly. But I do have a question where if you have a loan that has a 7% interest rate and the owed amount is like $5,000, then you have another loan that's a lower percentage, but the amount owed is higher than the other one with the higher interest rate.
It's the same principle. One of the things we can fall back on from a purely financial, by the numbers perspective, we can follow the interest rates. Whatever the APR is, not the simple interest rate, but the APR, which includes your interest rate and any fees.
What are some concerns about only making minimum payments on credit cards or even student loans?
It's going to take a really long time to pay it off, and you're going to pay more and more interest over the course of those years. A lot of the minimum payments, especially for a lot of private student loans, are set up so it takes 10, 20, 30, 40 years to pay off. In that kind of situation, you might be paying 3, 4, 5, 6 times the actual loan amount. The faster we can pay that down, the faster we can make a plan to just cut expenses in other areas, maybe increase income in some other area, and pay that off as fast as possible, because interest works for us when we invest. Interest kills us for our debt. It works for the other companies. It works the same way for them like it does for our investments. Basically, we're an investment for them.
How much income should we ideally save each month or year?
That's a great question. It's not so much as a specific money number. What I like and what the kind of general rule of thumb, and I'm going to go through a lot of just general rules of thumb. I do want to preface, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of situation, but these rules of thumb help us center around a benchmark for ourselves. Each of your own unique situations might differ a little bit, but as a general rule of thumb, we should be looking at a percentage. 20% of every paycheck. 20% of every paycheck should go into not just savings, but investments. For retirement, specifically only for retirement. We have this concept of we need to save for retirement. Saving is not going to get us there. You put your money into a savings account, and you're getting maybe 0.1% interest. We have to invest for retirement. If we're looking at how much we save out of every paycheck, then we need to build an emergency fund and a solid foundation first, and then invest 20% of every paycheck we get. It doesn't matter if we make $2,000 a month or $10,000 a month, or there's some very fortunate people making $50,000 a month. It is 20%. That doesn't change. Even when you get a raise at work, like you mentioned, putting 20% of that into your retirement accounts as well. Then, after that, this goes back to what are your life goals? What do you need to save for in the next years? Are you planning on getting married? Are you planning on having kids? Are you planning on buying a house? Or is there a big trip? Whatever that is, then we need to put money aside and save or invest for that.
Absolutely. And before we save the 20%, it sounds like we should have an emergency fund in place.
Yes.
What's the numbers or percentage with that? Or how do you find out how much somebody should have in their emergency nest egg?
So again, this varies, but the rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months. 3 to 6 months of salary or income that comes in after taxes. But this also is for emergencies. We have to take stock and realize what are the emergencies we have that can come up in life. If you are a homeowner already, what are the emergencies with your home? I'll give you a quick example. 2021, probably because we were at home with the pandemic, we're using utilities and stuff a lot more. Within the span of about 6 months, I had 2 AC units break.
Oh,
I had a water tank break. I had a freezer break. I had a garbage disposal break. And I had my sub pump break. All of that was about 15 grand in 6 months. I thought I was just the unluckiest person in the world. And it could have been a product of just being home, using the stuff more. But we also have to realize all the utilities and stuff we have in our house, those are going to have to be replaced pretty much every 10 to 15 years. That's their lifespan. If you buy a house when they were all bought together, which they commonly are, it's reasonable for them all to break somewhat at the same time. We have to plan around that for our emergencies.
And it's really important to have cash for those expenses, because that could become a credit card debt.
Or having to take out another type of high interest loan or something for it. Or go without. Go without an AC unit. Or I could probably get away with going without a garbage disposal.
Yeah.
Or maybe even going without a freezer or something for a portion of time. But these emergencies do come up. Car wrecks happen. Look at the forest fires out in California right now, and all the homes burning. Even when they do have fire insurance, those claims are going to take 2 to 4 years to pay out. What are the circumstances? People still haven't been paid out for some of the flooding that's happened here in western and eastern Kentucky, even when they did have insurance for specific flood damage. What are the scenarios where the emergencies are likely to come up with, and might be more than 3 months' salary? But also, what's the biggest emergency? Complete loss of our income. We lose our job, we can't do our job because of health issues or something, or family issues. So what's the likelihood we're going to be able to get another job?
Because you said 3 to 6 months of your income, not of like your monthly expenses or bills, because I've heard sometimes where it was 3 to 6 months of expenses or bills.
And that is another rule of thumb we can use. In building up, we can use for emergencies, it can be 3 to 6 months of expenses. And we can use all expenses depending on the person. We can use just minimal expenses. So just basic food, basic utilities. We're not going out. Kids are pulled from their extracurriculars. We're not shopping anymore, that kind of thing. We're not going out to eat. Or we could have 3 to 6 months of maintaining living. But if it's 3 to 6 months of your expenses, that's generally about 3 to 6 months of your income as well, which is why they get used interchangeably a lot. It's based off of your personal preferences, how much you want to cut if crises happen. And if you lose your income, how long is it going to take for you to get another job? There are lots of professions. You can lose your job and you can go out, and the likelihood that if you're good at what you do, you can get another job relatively quickly in kind of the same industry. You look at professors that might not have the security of tenure yet, or I know when I went out on the job market and got my job here at UK, there were, in my specialization, 4 openings in the entire country.
Wow.
I've never seen more than 8 openings in my area in a given year.
Yeah.
Which means it's a lot tougher for me if I was to lose my job or unable to do my job to find another one. And it definitely means relocating to most likely a whole nother state. Then that would have to be accounted for in an emergency fund. Again, 3 to 6 months is a rule of thumb, but it's what's your specific needs, what are your preferences as well, and then go up from there.
Essentially, we need to pay attention to what am I going to need for emergency money.
Absolutely. And not just you, your family.
When we're building our emergency fund, where should we put that? Because I have a feeling we probably shouldn't put it under our mattress.
Oh, definitely not under the mattress, not in the back of the closet. The standard place most people keep an emergency fund is just a separate savings account. Opening up with your local branch and a bank or a credit union, you can easily do that. Typically, I would recommend an online-only savings account. They're typically going to earn you a little bit more interest instead of a brick and mortar where you actually can go into a place and they're paying for all that upkeep of the location, the personnel, and all of the effort that takes. They're typically only giving you maybe a 0.1% interest rate, which is very low. You're not earning anything. It's not necessarily a point of the emergency fund, but if we can make a little bit more money, why wouldn't we? But the online banks and bankrate.com is a nice service that gives you the best savings account rates. They give you the best rates for a lot of different banking services. But an online savings account will often give you 1%, which is 10 times the amount. Still not a whole lot, but it's 10 times the amount of interest you would be earning in a brick and mortar. And also because it's online, there's this psychological effect that I can't just go in and just take the money. It's there in case I need it. And then I have to transfer it out or get a check mailed to me to actually use it, or transfer it into another account so I can use it. And generally with most emergencies, you have time to sort it out. Even if you have to pay that emergency on your credit card, you still have the 30 days to sort it out. What I also do too is a lot of brokerage accounts. If you have a standard brokerage account, they have money market funds that are associated with it. To put it in very basic terms, it's like a savings account with your brokerage account. Often it can even have a little bit of a higher interest rate where I've seen 1.5%, 2%, even 3%.
But these accounts are typically more safe than the stock market.
Yes. Essentially, they'll take that money and they'll put it in, and it's technically invested in other money, to put it very simply. But it stays there, it earns a little bit more interest, and it's more of that out of sight, out of mind until you need it.
Gotcha. Okay, emergency fund, first priority, and then 20% of your income into retirement investments. Where do we go from there after 20% into retirement investments? What's generally recommended?
When we're thinking about 20% into retirement investments, we're thinking about putting it into a couple of different accounts. Typically, if your employer has a retirement account, such as a 401k or like we have here at a university, a 403b, they're essentially the same thing, but they are retirement accounts that are tax deferred, which means we don't have to pay taxes now as we invest. It comes straight out of our paycheck before taxes, and then we can invest it in a series of different types of funds. We can choose based off of what's allowed for us. That's set up by our employer and their brokerage they're using. But often with that, we have matching. And that's really the value of an employer retirement account is that matching.
Especially at UK.
Especially at UK.
Yeah.
We have a 2-to-1 matching here at UK. So if we put in 5%, they put in an additional 10%, which is an automatic 200% return.
Yeah.
You were never going to get that guarantee
It's
in
incredible.
the market.
Going off your recommendations, we would only have to put out another 5% to hit that 20% mark.
Yes. Into our retirement accounts.
Yeah.
Now, what I generally suggest as a rule of thumb, now you can maximize that. You can put that other 5% into your 401k if you want. But as an alternative, we have what's called a Roth IRA or a Roth individual retirement account. And that is funded with post-tax dollars. We've already paid taxes on it. And so we can invest up to $7,000 a year, or currently this year. It goes up a little bit every year. We invest money into that account, and we have full access to the whole market to invest in. And the beauty is we don't pay taxes. You can...
Because it's post-tax.
Because it's post-tax. We've already paid taxes on it. It's a retirement account, and it will grow all the way. And as long as we don't withdraw, there's a few exceptions, such as medical emergencies, buying your first house kind of thing. But as long as we don't withdraw any of the profit we've earned in that account until 59 and a half, which is approaching retirement age, we get all of that tax-free. So I would put up to your matching, whatever your matching is, into your employer's retirement account. Then maximize your Roth IRA.
Yeah.
If you still haven't met that 20%, well, one, congrats, you're doing really well. You have a great salary. Then you might have to fund it into a standard brokerage account, which is taxable every time you sell and you make a profit. But you should be having one of those as well for any of those big purchases that are coming up in the long term. If you're planning to buy a house in the next 10 years, you might be putting money into a standard brokerage account to start growing that money a little bit at a faster pace. And generally that rule of thumb is if you're going to use the money within 3 to 5 years, you shouldn't invest it in the market.
How about extra cash? Should they focus that money on debt, retirement, or investments? What would you do with that?
Well, again, let's follow the interest rates. What are the highest interest rates? If you have high interest rate debt, like credit card debt, make sure we pay that off. Now, I do want to caution that's not an excuse to just spend more on the credit card because you have extra cash and now I'm telling you to pay that high interest debt off. So we don't want to fall into that cycle. But if we already have this high interest debt through student loans, through maybe a bad car loan with a high interest debt, I've seen some of those car loans be 12 or 16%, then we might want to pay that off quicker. But if we have a lower interest rate, that's only 2 or 3%, then historically speaking, we could probably get more in investments. Historically speaking, if you were invested in, say, like a general S&P 500 fund or mutual fund or ETF, even better, which is just a fund that groups basically the 500 largest publicly traded companies together, and you get to buy little portions of each of those stocks for each of those companies. That's going to generally, historically speaking, there are no guarantees in life or in the market, but that's going to average you a return of 7 to 12%.
Say you had a loan and it was a 3% loan, but you have another investment that is returning, say, 5 to 7%, something more than 3%. You're suggesting you could put that extra cash into the investment, but continue to make the minimum payments on the 3% loan, because over time you will still come out with more money because the return on the investment is larger than 3%.
Yes. Now, that's the rule of thumb. That's by the numbers. That's the personal finance kind of approach. But again, it depends on your own personal preferences. If you have a psychological effect of stress, where there's debt just hanging over your shoulder, or I've heard clients in the past say there's just this black cloud of debt that just hangs over me that I constantly think about, or it's in the back of my mind, then absolutely, if it's causing stress in your life, pay off that debt faster. Again, it depends on your own personal preferences as well. There's the saying by one of my old professors at the University of Georgia, Dr. Joe Getz, and he says, when the right answer is wrong.
When the right answer's wrong?
When it's wrong for you. If the right answer might be to follow the interest rates and investing that money so you can earn more in the long run. But if you're constantly stressed out about having or holding some debt, and it's affecting the rest of your life, then that by the numbers answer might be wrong for you. Then do what's right for you and in accordance with your values.
That's a great piece of wisdom, because sometimes the right answer is wrong. What is, if any, the difference between bad debt and good debt? What advice would you give to folks struggling with debt?
Yeah, this concept comes up a lot. So what is good debt? What is bad debt? And there's a lot of financial gurus out there that say all debt is bad. You should never have any debt. But essentially our economy, our society is still based off of debt. What I mean by that, it's based off of credit, which is just a form of debt. It might be revolving or a limited amount of debt, but it's based off of debt. Traditionally, what is good debt is debt you are taking on for a specific purpose, with intentionality, that you have a plan for, and is within your means. Often this includes buying a house, buying a car for transportation to work, taking on student loans, but all of it is still intentional. It's still within your means. You're not buying a McMansion if that's not what you can afford. And you will always qualify for more than you can afford for a car loan. You will always qualify for more than you can afford for a home loan.
Because they want you to take the loan.
They want you to take the money. They don't care if you struggle or not. We have to do our own due diligence right there. And we have to say what is going to be good for us. And then taking on that debt to help our life, help our lifestyle, but it has to be within our plan, within our spending plan, within our goals, and within our means. Bad debt is pretty much everything else. We can take out student loans, but if we have a plan of where we're going and the career trajectory, we're going to be able to pay off those student loans, and we're not taking out too much student loans. I know of lawyers that go to law school and they take out hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, even more than what they need to, just to show, hey, I'm the doctor, I'm the lawyer, so I'm going to live it up a little bit more. And so they're taking on tremendous amounts of debt they don't really need. And then their plan is to then go into maybe smaller practices or public service where they might not be earning enough to really pay off those debts. And that can be said about any major. Any major can be profitable and it can be within your means, but you have to have a plan and structure around that.
Well, that's a fresh approach for me, because typically what I've heard is good and bad debt is based on asset class or what it is. For example, a house could be called a hard asset. You could sell it. It's like an investment property. Whereas a student loan, the asset is yourself, but you don't sell yourself in the same way you sell a house.
Essentially, you still are. You're building what's called human capital in yourself. You're raising your own capital. Through a college, university like UK, you're making lots of contacts and networking. So you're building also social capital. You're building two types of capital for yourself, going through and using that tuition to build that capital. But with a house, you're building a hard asset. You're building something that you could sell, but that's presuming the market doesn't crash, or you're not underwater where you owe more than the house is worth, or you don't go into debt by where you get into a situation or emergency crisis arises and you can't pay your mortgage and then it gets foreclosed on and you have to still pay a lot of that debt back. Again, a house is good when it's intentional and in your means and within your spending plan.
Tell me about diversification.
Yeah, that's a fun word. Diversification is probably one of the most important things when it comes to investing. Diversification can be a whole bunch of different things or have different kind of avenues. What mostly we think about with diversification is exactly what the word is, diversify, where we need to diversify our investments. We need to invest or spend money into multiple different areas or different companies, if we're buying stocks, for instance, that it minimizes our risk. So if we're investing, let's say $10,000, we're not going to put all of that money just in Apple stock or Microsoft stock or big one, NVIDIA right now. We're not going to put it all in just one company, because what happens if that company fails? Then we're going to lose it all. We're going to minimize the risk by spreading out that $10,000 across multiple companies. Like I mentioned, an S&P 500 fund earlier, where it's, again, 500 of the largest publicly traded companies. You can buy a portion of each of those. You might buy a single share. You might be buying just a portion of a single share of all those companies. And that's diversification, is spreading money out across all 500 companies. In the S&P 500 right now, we already have all the big tech companies, Microsoft, Apple, NVIDIA, Tesla. They're all in there already. And so we're buying a little bit of all of that. So if one company fails, we're not losing everything. We're still banking on all the 499 other companies still doing well. So it minimizes risk. Diversification also can mean diversifying in different types of investment structures.
Yeah.
While the easiest, the most common is investing in the market. We can also invest in real estate. And if you want to go the real estate route with buying land and holding that for an extended period of time until it goes up in value, or going the landlord route and renting out properties to other people and earning investment money that way as well, or investing even in valuable commodities such as art, gold, silver, gems, that kind of thing as well. Everything has their inherent risk associated with it. The more we spread it out, the more we can help mitigate risk, but it's also going to take more time, energy, knowledge about what you're doing. So you're going to have to still do your due diligence about it, which is why the rule of thumb for most people, if you don't want to get into the real estate game, you can just go into the regular stock markets. There's great funds called REITs, REITs, which are real estate investment trust or real estate funds. If you want to get into real estate, but you don't want to be a landlord, or you don't want to buy a house or buy land and wait for it, you can invest in companies that do that for you. You can invest in those real estate funds as well as a portion of your investment accounts.
Say we have $10,000 and we're going to diversify across different assets and investments. What's the rule of thumb for that percentage-wise?
That's going to vary on your own risk tolerance. There's lots of different models. There's lots of different assessments out there. You can meet with financial advisors and they can help you determine what your own risk tolerance is and what your own allocation of those investments might be. But as you're just starting out, if you only have $10,000, you're really just setting up a strong foundation. You're setting up a strong base, which means you need to just be diversified. There's already funds, if you're looking for retirement, that are called target date funds. We have them in our own 403B, for instance, Fidelity with UK. They will just diversify and they will invest everything for you across a market spectrum and slowly decrease your risk as you get towards retirement. But if you're investing in your Roth IRA or a standard brokerage account, you can still invest in those if you want through your own brokerage. You can also just invest in what's called total market funds, which is a small piece, very small piece of every stock that's publicly traded. And that's going to give you a very broad.
That's really diversified.
It's the most diversified you can get.
Okay.
Generally, most people starting out with a foundation, and this isn't specific advice to any specific individual out there, but setting up a foundation of doing a total market fund, doing a S&P 500 or a large cap fund, which is those 500 largest publicly traded companies, can be a strong kind of initial base. How you break that down, generally maybe 40 to 60% of your portfolio might be that. And then building from there. As you're doing your base, you are buying different types of mutual funds or what's called ETFs, which are less actively managed typically, but they're also a little bit cheaper.
ETFs are less managed and cheaper.
Yes. They're actively managed more throughout the year, which means you have to pay higher fees for that management. But ultimately, statistically, they work out about the same. S&P 500 mutual fund and an S&P 500 ETF, very similar because the top 500 companies don't really change all that much throughout the year. You're not going to change that much in the profit, but there is always that fee, and they're always going to take that off the top. Avoiding that fee as much as possible. There still are some fees with ETFs, but they're less because somebody still has to put it all together. Somebody still has to buy everything, and so we got to pay for that work, right? That expertise. But are there specific funds that you're interested in? If you want to invest more in the finance sector, if you want to invest more in a utilities sector or a commerce sector, what do you think the market is going to do? A lot of people in healthcare like to invest in the healthcare sector. There's funds that only invest then in healthcare companies. We can start breaking down the remaining, if 60% of $10,000 is very diversified across the board, we can start breaking down the remaining 40% in specific sectors we're interested in or we think are going to do well. Or we can look at mid-cap, which are the middle size companies in the market, or small cap, which are the smaller companies.
Cap is short for capitalization?
Yes.
Okay.
And that can give us even more diversification too. Now, all of those are going to be in our total market index, but if we want to focus in a specific area, I also want to emphasize there is nothing wrong than putting 100% into a total market fund. You can just do that and forget it. For me, I have a portion of my UK funds in our target date funds. I think it's a great vehicle. You're not going to probably earn as much as some of the more aggressive accounts out there, but you're not going to potentially lose as much as well.
So it's a middle of the road approach.
It's a middle of the road approach. And those are the set it and forget it, because it automatically changes for you because you set your specific target date of when you plan to retire.
On the topic of diversification, the new asset class on the block is cryptocurrencies. What's your general opinion on it? What's your basic recommendation? How should we approach cryptocurrencies?
On a basic level, if you're still setting up your foundation, we shouldn't be touching them because they are just too volatile right now. There's too much unknown. But in a standard brokerage account, typically that rule of thumb where you can have no more than 10% as maybe riskier money, and some asset allocations, you're allowed up to 10% as a little bit more riskier if you can afford it. First of all, that rule of thumb is you have to still never invest more than you're willing to lose, especially with volatile or risky investments. Crypto being
one of those
main ones. We've seen how volatile it is. I know there's a lot of buzz around it because it has made tremendous strides, especially like Bitcoin over the past year, 2 years, 3 years. It just keeps going up. And so people are like, oh, that FOMO, the fear of missing out. And everyone thinks, oh, I could have been this billionaire by now if I had just invested then. And hindsight is always going to be 20/20. But it just as easily could have gone down and plummeted. I did quickly look this up too. And over the past decade, over 50% of the crypto market, the coins have died. Over 14,000 crypto coins that have been created and have gone on the public market have died. So that's not a great thing. And a lot of analysis say about 95% are expected to eventually die. But for the time being, there are some front runners, Bitcoin being the number one there, that is stable, is strong. It's never going to be a currency. I hate the term cryptocurrency because it's not intended actually to be used in transactional purposes. It doesn't have the bandwidth. It can't hold up to that kind of scrutiny. But it can be a reserve or a store of wealth. Like the Federal Reserve maintains a store of wealth that basically keeps our dollar value at its current value. We used to be all based off the gold standard. We came off of that. So crypto, especially like Bitcoin, could be seen as a store of wealth that then we could exchange for actual dollars.
So it could be treated like gold used to be treated in a way?
A little bit. But what I see, and no one can predict the future, anyone saying it's going to the moon, it's doing all this, it's going to be, they're just talking. They don't know. Nobody knows. No one can predict what's going to happen with any company, with any asset, with any investment. But it is likely to go up or continue to go up in value for the time being. It's just going to be largely dependent on how much buy-in from other countries, what kind of regulations are going to be set, how the governments are going to use it. And so there's going to be a lot of unknowns. And I think we're going to see a lot in 2025, 2026. That's going to give us a nice idea about that direction. What I will say, though, is what it's based off of can be good. There's been a lot of big companies, FTX, Celsius, Luna, even their own financial managers have said basically these are Ponzi schemes that have crashed and burned. People have lost money. Even in a lot of the brokerage accounts that sell crypto, they're not going to be insured by the government. And they flat out state that. So it is risky. And if something goes wrong or it plummets, they might be locked up. And you can't sell them or access them. There's still a lot of regulation that probably still needs to take place. But the technology itself, the blockchain technology, I think also has a lot of potential in the future. I don't think we've actually seen what's going to emerge that's going to be what's going to be used more in the future yet, as they're continuing to build it out and build upon it. But things like buying and selling real estate, copyright laws, medical records, there's a lot of potential there with the blockchain technology and protecting privacy, tracking records, those kind of things. Don't be tempted by the get-rich-quick mentality. It takes time to build your wealth.
Talk to me about finance mentalities and our relationship with money, our attitudes with money.
Well, unfortunately, one of the main mentalities we see is the get-quick-rich mentality. But the proper financial one is we need to look ahead towards the future. We need that long-term planning. One of the phrases I use in my classes a lot to carry this point of basically the time value of money, that your money will grow over time if properly set, is a old Chinese proverb of remembering to plant the tree. When's the best time to plant a tree?
100 years ago?
Yeah, 100 years ago, 20 years ago. I use 20 years ago because that's realistic in my lifetime. But when's the second best time?
Right now?
Right now. Correct. You got it.
Okay.
Right? We can live in hindsight, but if we haven't done something 20 years ago, then we need to start doing it now. What I don't want people to get to is, especially for our students, getting to a point where they're in their 50s or 60s looking at retirement and saying, oh, now I should start planning for retirement. Now I need to start saving and investing for my retirement. Because that's going to be way too late. Now, if they haven't, something's better than nothing. But for proper retirement, we need to start as early as possible. And that's really that time value of money and putting off the whole keeping up with the Joneses or Kardashians or whoever TikTok person there is right now. Let me give you an example of this. When we look at investments in the scope of earning money on our money, or what's called compound investing, it's more valuable to invest. You will make more money if you invest between 25 and 35 consistently and stop just for those 10 years and stop until retirement age than if you invested from 35 to 65, those 30 years. The first 10 years of most people's earning lives, 25 to 35, where you're really building your career and getting out there. That is the most important decade of your life.
Even
now,
if we just did like the 20% income standard.
Yeah, if you did 20% of your paychecks between 25 and 35, or you put in, let's say, $1,000 every month, 25 to 35, you're going to earn more than $1,000 every month from 35 to 65. That 10 years versus 30 years. But it's when you start matters so much. Now, of course, you should start at 25 and go all the way up to when you retire.
Exactly.
And that's going to make even more, and you're going to start to see an exponential curve through all that, and that's where you're really earning compound interest or earning interest on your interest, earning money on your money, which is a great mentality to have. The more you start seeing that curve, there's a greater psychological effect of, oh, I'm really making it now. I'm really growing it now.
But it's a long game.
It's a long game because typically to start seeing that curve, you might start seeing hints of it at your first 100K. Then you really start seeing it after 300K. But it can take a while to get there.
Right.
It can take years to get there. One thing I've done with clients, I do with students, is I want you to visualize what your retired self is going to look like. What are you going to be doing in retirement? What kind of house or housing do you want to live in? Who's around you? What kind of things do you want to do with them? Where do you want to go? What do you want to eat or be entertained with? What are the costs that are going to be associated with that? Then working backwards, we have to start early enough to really get that or make that picture a reality. We have to envision our future self because we live in the moment. As humans, we are so present focused. We are concerned about what our present day concerns are, but we have to take a part of that, namely 20%, and put it towards our future.
Well said. Are there any prominent financial myths you come across often you would like to debunk?
Yes, there are a few. One, I would say keeping a debt or a balance on your credit card. Always keeping a little bit of a debt on your credit card each month is going to help your credit score. Completely false. Pay it off completely. It's not going to improve your credit score. It's not necessarily hurting your credit score. It might be a little bit depending on how much of your debt you are keeping on there, but it's not helping it. All you're doing is just paying interest payments to the credit card company. Don't leave anything on it each month. Pay it off. I think we've addressed a couple of the other ones, but I did want to say one of the biggest myths out there is I can't do anything. I'm not saying it's easy. I've laid out a lot of rules of thumb. It makes it look like it can be easy or there's simple explanations for things. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of hard work, a lot of grit to pull things around, to even do a New Year's reset, like you said before. But there's a quote by Dr. Moira Summers. She's a leading financial neuropsychologist. She has a book called Money, Mind, and Meaning, which I love. It goes through a lot of our values and our psychological issues around money. But she has a quote that says, "Among the most limiting beliefs is a person's conviction he or she could do nothing to create a different outcome."
Powerless.
Yes. And I think that's one of the biggest myths. There are definitely societal pressures. There are definitely policies, programs, systems that are working against us. It definitely takes a lot of work to navigate through that stuff, but we can make small incremental changes. Going back to the Chinese proverb, we have to remember to plant the tree. If we didn't do it 20 years ago, we have to do it now. And for those that are like 18, sorry, you couldn't have started 20 years ago. But starting now, so we don't get 20 years later and wish we had started it.
A popular study by Princeton University economists Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton found happiness generally increases with income until it reaches a plateau at around $75,000 per year, meaning earning more money beyond that point does not significantly increase happiness levels. Bruce, do you think this information is true and or relevant today?
That's a great question. I love this study. Both of the researchers are phenomenal. They're both Nobel Prize winners in economics. Very smart at what they do. I will say, one, the study was back in 2010. With inflation, that's about $108,000 from that original study. And to an extent, that still exists. But this was for, one, happiness. What's interesting in that study is they found life satisfaction continued to go up. There was no plateau. Happiness, they found there was this plateau, and part of that was measuring effects. They just said, are you happy or not? There was no adjustment period or a Likert scale of 1 to 10. It was
just like a yes or a no. Okay.
But what was interesting is with life satisfaction, that just continued to increase with income. It makes sense because life satisfaction is often attributed to or associated with our achievement, our career success, our career worth, where happiness is generally driven more with qualities of a relationship, our health, our leisure time. It's not necessarily always related directly to money. One is there's the difference between happiness and life satisfaction with money, but re-examining the data, if you actually break down the data they had or they actually found that there was or it continued to rise for about 80% of people. There was a plateau at 75% when they looked at all of them. But if you take out 20%, which were just very unhappy people, it just continued to rise. The threshold actually goes up, and even with reanalyses and restudies that are more current, it continues to go up all the way up to about 500,000. It only stops there because there's not enough people that are at 500,000 to reliably measure. happiness does continue to improve with higher income levels. There is an important caveat here. So happiness goes up because having more money leads to more choices, more freedom, feeling more in control of our lives and circumstances is generally what they've found. And UPenn has done follow-up studies on that has found that. But that 20% is important. That 20% that was always unhappy. Basically, the conclusion is if you're rich and miserable, more money is not going to help you. It's going back and let's focus on our values again. All your money goals are all your life goals. Your life goals are your money goals. You got to focus on your relationships, your health, your leisure time, what you're doing in accordance with your money and your values. The second caveat with all of that is if you were focused on earning more money, you weren't going to be as happy. But if you were focused on just building your general life satisfaction, your happiness in life, and you happen to increase your income, you are going to be happier and continue to raise that happiness. Again, let's focus on you, your values, your happiness, your life satisfaction, and your income is going to be a byproduct of happiness, I think, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And having a decent roadmap helps too, which I hope this conversation offers that to people. If people are looking for more, they want to go more in depth, they want to get new perspectives, they can turn to your podcast, couldn't they?
Yes, I'm a co-host for a podcast called Modern Husbands. You can find it anywhere that streams podcasts or even YouTube. But we take a look more on the relational aspect of money, building your relational well-being as a married couple and helping your finances as well. If you are just looking to revise your financial plan, if you have more questions about your own personal finances, I do want to mention starting in January of 2025. So right now, we will have UK student interns as financial coaching that will provide no-cost financial advice to students, staff, and members of the community at large. You can bring in yourself, you and your partner, your whole family, and get no-cost financial coaching and learn more about your own personal finances, help you set up your own personal financial plans to build that stronger foundation. That's going to be on campus, iRaft Center Clinic.
Awesome. Excellent resources. Thank you. If listeners were only going to remember one piece of financial wisdom, what do you hope that would be?
That's a tough one because there's so many things.
There was a lot. We did cover a lot today. That's great.
I'm going to go back to remembering to plant the tree. I think that's probably one of the most important things in that you need to start now, like whatever you're doing, because it is such a long-term game. Planning for our future requires we start thinking about it and doing it now.
Yeah.
Whatever your age is, however old you are listening to it, we need to focus now and be thinking about it. Even myself, next year, I'll be thinking about it again and reassessing my goals. When I look back and I think, 10 years ago, I was in a completely different place, thinking different things, not knowing I was going to be here, not knowing I was going to have the house I have or even getting married or anything right now. But we have to reset those plans by putting in things for planning for the future now. We're ready for them as they come up too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Becoming Wildly Resilient Conversations. Dr. Bruce Ross shared a wealth of personal finance information and wisdom, ranging from personal finance basics, investing, and money mentalities conducive to success and life satisfaction. Thank you for listening to Becoming Wildly Resilient. This podcast is brought to you by University of Kentucky Human Resources, Health and Wellness. We offer a wide range of online and in-person services to support the well-being of UK employees, retirees, and their spouses. You can find experts in mental health, personal resilience, nutrition, and physical activity. We're ready to meet you where you are and address your unique needs. To learn more about the work, life, and well-being services offered by UK Human Resources, visit hr.uky.edu/wellbeing. You can also connect with us on social media and YouTube by searching at UKY Wellness or by email at healthandwellness@uky.edu.